I never thought my life would turn out this way. I never imagined all the challenges and setbacks and disappointments. I never imagined the opportunities and the blessings. It's been a journey. And in the journey, I have learned and am still learning that God's plans are far greater than my own. His love is more amazing and his grace is more amazing than I could ever imagined. And nothing could separate me from that love. This is the story of my uplifting journey, part 1. I have been thinking and praying about sharing my story for like months now. Months. I still have no idea how we're going to do this thing. But let's start at the very beginning. I was born and raised in Queens, New York City. I was born into a wonderful family of people who love Jesus. I'm a pastor's kid. I'm a pastor's grandkid. There has never been a time in my life that I didn't know Jesus. That's bad grammar. Bottom line, I always knew about Jesus. And, I prayed to know him as a child, faith of a child, right? But when I hit adolescence, I became rebellious, super rebellious. I knew Jesus was real. I knew that I would serve him one day. I didn't want him in my life at the moment, at least not up close and personal. And I wanted to do my own thing. And I was not happy. Like, I got into fights. I messed around with boys. I had this horrible attitude that I'm like, man, I drank, I smoked cigarettes. And all of this was at 12 and 13 in a private Christian school. And it was around that time that I learned that my uncle, one of my mom's brothers, was diagnosed with AIDS. Now, keep in mind, this is probably around 1990, 91. The world was not responding very well to AIDS at all. So it was a lot to find out. And when I was in the 7th grade, I was just angry. And then one day I randomly took all the pills that were in the medicine cabinet and ended up in the ER getting my stomach pumped. And I could not tell you for the life of me, like, why I did it. I don't think I wanted to die. There's probably a gazillion reasons, right? But I think a big flat out reason is spiritual warfare, right? My parents are loving, serving, persevering, and I think the devil was pissed that they were faithful. The summer after 8th grade, one of the leaders in my church's youth choir was shot, and that was devastating. And the day after his funeral, my uncle moved into our home because he wasn't well enough to live on his own. And that was the weekend before I started my freshman year, and I was off the wall, just off the wall. So that was the fall of starting high school. The following spring, after a lot of ups and downs with my uncle's health. He had 24-hour round-the-clock home care nurses. He had a blood transfusion in the house. 3 days before my birthday, he died. And I really didn't know how to process it. I was grateful that he could be with us in his last months, that he was with our family. But I was also 14 years old. Like, I didn't know how to process my emotions. And I didn't know how to process that some of these emotions could be depression. I did whatever I could to escape those feelings. And that was 30 years ago. In the years that followed, I was angry, I was sad, I was mean, I was confused. I drank a lot. I would steal 40s before school and put it in my coat. Like, I'd go to sequential 1 math drunk. I did drugs. I was promiscuous. My teachers would tell my parents I had so much potential, and I really just didn't care. I wouldn't do my homework. I ended up in summer school every summer. I even had to go to summer school the summer after my high school graduation because I failed at least 1 class. I don't remember, probably more. I hated school. I hated high school. I hated school. So it's a miracle that I finished. Then I started a community college, dropped out the following year, got some jobs, worked here and there. And then my mom, she insisted that I at least get my 2-year degree, which I'm so grateful for. I started going to Queensboro Community College, and I also started doing cocaine. I knew I was not in a good place. I knew that I was doing things that I said I probably, or thought I probably would never do. But I had been talking with some friends like, hey, let's go to Mexico for spring break next year. And even though I knew I needed to change some things in my life, I'm like, but if I go to Mexico, I don't want to go to Mexico sober. So I'm just going to, do all the things and I'll figure something out on the other side of the trip. And then I'll get my life together, right? Like as if I could get my own life together. But one Sunday in January, I drove with a couple friends to one friend's church. And I had been there to go to a Christmas production or something, but was going with them, which was just interesting now that I think back. Like I went to church, in my parents' church, but I wasn't really into going to church. So we're driving, and I remember we were on the Jackie Robinson Parkway and sitting in traffic, and I told God in my heart, I said, I don't want to get emotional today. I just want to hear the choir, sing, and I want to go home. And that's it. Because I knew what it was like to be convicted by the Holy Spirit, and I did not want that interrupting my life. Like I had a plan to have fun, and I did not want anything, the conviction, to interrupt my plans. Well, God had other plans. All I remember is we went to church, ended up sitting in the balcony, and after worship, the pastor felt to share a part of his testimony. And apparently he had this whole other sermon plan to preach, but really sensed the Spirit was leading him to tell this part of his story. Long story short, the pastor shares how he and his then girlfriend, who were super wild and off the wall, went to Mexico as young people. God began to deal with them during and after the trip and shortly after they got saved. It's a whole story, a powerful story. And he went on to say more, but all I remember is that I went from the balcony and I ended up in the front getting prayer at the altar call because conviction. And I remember someone prayed for me, and then they were talking to me afterwards like, is there any way that I could pray for you specifically? And I was like, I do drugs, but I don't really have a problem, which is like hysterical. But I said, I really want to meet with that pastor, the one who just told his story. And they said something like, oh, you can meet with this pastor. He takes appointments. He's not really available. And I was like, nah, no thanks. I'm out of here. Take care. And so I left to go meet up with my friends. And then I'm walking across the sanctuary. It was a bigger church. And this pastor made his way across the sanctuary to say, hey, I hear you wanted to meet with me. I hear you wanted to talk with me. I'm sorry I'm not available right now. I have a commitment, but if you call the office, I can meet with you this week. And so I was like, oh, cool, thanks. So I called. I ended up getting an appointment to see him that Tuesday. And I later found out that was like a work of God, because typically there would be like weeks of people waiting to get an appointment, right? So go meet with him, share a little bit of my story, including the fact that I was a pastor's kid. And I don't remember everything that we talked about. I remember he was very kind. And I remember him asking, do you read the Bible? And I was like, the Bible's boring. He then, was very gracious and went on and said, hey, maybe you can find a translation that you connect with, that you enjoy. He also gave me a copy of Warren Wiersbe's With the Word, which I ended up, the pages, the cover was falling off of that one. Like I had that for a long time. So finish the appointment, walk outside, find my friend, light a cigarette. And I'm like, yo, we're going to New Life, which is the Christian bookstore. At the time was the Christian bookstore on Queens Boulevard, not far from where we were. So we go and I buy a 1-year Bible in the New Living Translation. And for the next 9 days, I read that Bible every day. I read it every day and I didn't get into trouble. But then one day I didn't read my Bible. And then I happened to end up meeting up with one of my friends who I got high with. Then for the next couple months, it was like this downward spiral. I did not pick up my Bible at all. I got into stuff that was far worse than I had been doing up until that point. And I just ran from God hard. But remember, I would get convicted. So I would be in the neighborhood of that church pretty often. I had friends there, I had drug spots there, and I would go out of my way to not drive down the street that this church was on, even though it was like the main street to get through that neighborhood. So I would go through random blocks and back streets just so I couldn't see the front of the building, like as if that was going to make a difference. It's so funny the things that we think, right? But during that season, like for the next couple months, there was this insane spiritual battle going on inside of my heart. You know, outwardly, I was far worse. My actions, my behavior was like vile. But inwardly, this stirring and this like war, this battle was going on, and God was really dealing with me. I would go out. My parents had this Jesus fish van. They had a van with a Jesus fish on the back. So that when I would borrow the car, that's what I would borrow. And I remember on multiple occasions coming home from hanging out, a lot of times coming off a high, driving up and down the Long Island Expressway, listening to their gospel tapes in the car and crying, just sitting there in the presence of God, like crying. And this happened on multiple occasions. It was so bizarre and beautiful at the same time. I talked a little bit about that in the first episode of Mission Uplift of the podcast. Check it out if you want to hear a little bit more about the story. But man, bottom line, I was running from God, but it was getting more difficult to run. Fast forward, and I'm hanging out with this group of friends. It was like a different group of friends. I thought this is funny. I thought I had things under control because I had like a group of friends who I would get high with, and they thought I only got high with them. So they were like, oh, she's not that bad. But I had like 2 other groups of friends that I did the same thing. So it was not good. It appeared to the people I was around like, oh, it's just here and there, but it was increasing. And I ended up hanging out at this party, and I said, hey, I need to run and get something out of my car. And she was like, nah, man, like I know what you're going to get. And talking about like the Coke, you can't bring that in here. And this was not the first time that I had a friend call me out on my stuff. Again, I thought I had things under control and I was getting a little sloppy. So I ended up not getting it, or I think I threw it away. I was convicted. I felt ashamed, and but we still all got drunk that night. And then the next day, it was a Saturday night, so the next day, Sunday morning, and I got up and drove straight to my parents' church, which was not uncommon. Like I would still go to church in the middle of all this. I was working at an after-school care program where like with drug prevention posters, and then I would go and get high. Like that was my life, and then go to church. I remember going and just feeling super convicted, but I was going because I wanted to, not because I felt like an obligation to go. I just made a decision quietly in my heart. I'm going to serve Jesus. Like, enough. It's time. It wasn't this big emotional thing. I had that whole experience, which was divinely orchestrated by the Holy Spirit, that whole experience a couple months prior at the other church. And God was in that. But this time it was just this quiet decision. And I'm like, it's for real this time. I was 20 years old. I was on this journey with Jesus, but I needed to like do it different. I needed a fresh start, and I don't want to get ahead of myself. That's for another video. So join me next time for my uplifting journey, part 2. See you soon.